Done tonight. Um, Susan Speakman's big lie. Her big lie, the big lie, white privilege. We hear this term all the times now. And it's not just white privilege. There's male privilege, white privilege, and undoubtedly any number of other kinds of privilege. And this is all part of the same thing we've been talking about all night. If you're going to pander to groups and if you're going to get political power and you want to take groups of money from one group and give it to another group in exchange for votes so that you can stay in power and ride in your limousines and fly in the big private jet, the one with the 4 engines on it, the 747 with another one behind it, then you have to have a plan. And the way you have a plan is you set all these tribes against the middle, and one way to do it is through this idea of privilege. What they're basically saying is, well, first of all, they're saying shut up. That's the first thing. Because again, folks, once you understand this, it's really clear. The purpose of progressives is to come and steal you. Progressives take from the competent and the hardworking and the successful and give to the incompetent and the lazy and the stupid. That's how it works. That's the game. That's the scam. They're going to take your stuff and give it to people that don't do anything other than vote for them. That's how it works. So if they're going to come after you, they've got to demonize you. And white privilege is a way of saying, first of all, if you start giving us any grief about us taking all this money from you, how dare you speak to me? You are a white slave owner, and I am a person of color. And I'm a woman of color, furthermore. The entire history of my life has been being oppressed physically, emotionally, intellectually by you, and you've been stealing from me my entire life, and now I'm standing up at last and speaking truth to power, so I'm going to take back some of the things that you stole from me. That's how the scam works. And that's why white people have to be demonized and males have to be demonized, because if women are going to take stuff from men, then males have to be demonized. If black people are going to take stuff away from men, then white people have to be demonized. And if you want to go after the one part of the population that's been successful and done all the real work prior to 50 years ago, the external work of building the country, that's not to say motherhood and housekeeping and all the rest are not critically important, but if you actually want to go and look at who built most of this stuff, it's white males. And so they're the target-rich environment, right? They're the low-hanging fruit. That's where the money is. That's where the power is. Demonize them. And so we say, well, you live a life of privilege. Now, listen, this was probably true for any time right up until about 1970, I want to say, round numbers. If you were to come to me as a black woman in 1955 and say, you have privileges that I don't have, she'd be right. She'd be right. There was prejudice throughout the entire country, especially in the South, that was keeping her back. Prejudice against women that was keeping them back. They were right. They had a point. But now it's not only not true, it's the inverse of true. Does anybody out there actually honestly think that if there are two candidates for the job and one of them is white and one of them is black and all other things being equal, and forget about it being equal, just assume that all other things are being equal, and he's applying for a job or she's applying for a job at a major corporation, which one do you think is going to be hired? The white male or the black woman? Please, 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 please spare me. We all know. And Touré knows in his talk about, I'm being kept down, I'm being kept down, I'm being kept down. Come on, please, Touré. You're trotting out this slavery thing. Don't you have anything new? It sounds like you're riding into town on one of these medicine wagons. Might as well have a single horse and brightly painted wheels of wooden spokes, and you might as well have Dr. Touré's snake oil cure, because what you're selling me is something that's been out of vogue for a century now, right? It's played out, man. It's not true anymore. It's over. Now you can occasionally get people to admit this, but then what they want is retroactive revenge. In other words, if my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave owner, and he wasn't, but that shouldn't get in the way, and your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave, then you owe me, and I have to fork over my stuff. Well, let's get into this. It is true that in the cases of a slave owner and a slave, there was a great injustice done to the slave. That's true. But that slave is dead and that slaveholder is dead. And his kids are dead. And so are the other guy's kids. And those kids' kids are dead. And those kids' kids are dead. And those kids' kids are dead. And those kids' kids may be our grandparents today. So, I just think that you cannot undo an injustice by perpetrating another injustice. You can't undo an injustice by perpetrating another injustice. That's why the only case of reparations in my mind that ever could carry weight that I've seen in American history, they talk about reparations for Indians, reparations for blacks. The only case for reparations that I think had a solid ground and that I would support, at least in listen to hearing, was the reparations against Japanese Americans. You know why? You know what's different about that? Because they were talking about paying the people who actually suffered. That's why. They were talking about paying the people that actually suffered, that were harmed. That's the entire idea of tort law, is that if somebody's been harmed, you try to make them whole. You want to make them whole. If somebody hurt you and crippled you through negligence, then they owe you money to try to make up for the damage they've done to you. So, okay, you can at least make the case. But this idea that we're gonna make up what happened to slaves by paying their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, and furthermore demonizing the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of white people who very likely had nothing to do with, and when I say very likely, I mean 2 or 3%, had nothing to do with slavery. It's a fig leaf for the stick-up game. It's a stick-up game. It's a robbery, okay? That's what it is. It's institutionalized stealing from one group by another, and in order to get away with it, you have to demonize the people who are about to be robbed. That's your privilege. Now, I will say something that I like. I think this is pithy, and I happen to like it because I think it's true. There is, in fact, white privilege. At least for me, there is. And I'll tell you what my white privilege is. My white skin privilege is pretty simple, in that as a white male, I was never allowed to believe that someone else was responsible for my failures. That's my white skin privilege. My white skin privilege was that I was privileged enough to live in a family where no excuses were made for my failure, that there was nobody keeping me down, because there's nobody keeping these people down today. There's nobody keeping Touré down. There's nobody keeping these black professors, these young women who are talking about privilege. You can't even speak in the room because you're white. You have no right to speak here because you're privileged. Go away. Go away. Seriously, F you. Honestly, that's where I am right now. You get all the hiring benefits. You get all the social benefits. No, I'm not going to listen to it. But my privilege is that I never, ever had anybody telling me it's somebody else's fault. That's why you failed. When I fail, it's my fault. And that's a genuine blessing. That's a blessing. I've probably failed 5-6 times with businesses, and I just keep trying because I don't get to fail once and say, see, black people are keeping you down, Bill. It's not your fault. It's not like you were too lazy or you were too stupid or too cocksure or too arrogant or too ill-prepared or too underfunded. No, it's not your fault, Bill. There's an external force that's keeping you away from it. So you can just sit at home now and stew and be bitter and angry for the rest of your life because it really had nothing to do with you. Somebody else is keeping you down. I was never told that, and that's my white skin privilege. I never got to believe that lie. It's nice to be able to blame things on other people, because being successful is harder than being a failure. I ought to know I've tried both. I was a failure for 40 years, and now I'm a little more of a success, and I like to be more of a success in the future. It's much, much harder to be a success than it is to be a failure, and if somebody could cut me a good excuse for it, very likely I would have taken it, but they didn't, so I didn't.